barriers with legislation or removing barriers, because a lot of times that's what we're doing, especially with dental hygiene legislation. You're like, what's in the way right now of us doing what we could do, whether it's something we've been taught to do or something we're passionate about doing or something that's not being done for patient care. And it's getting all that red tape out of the way rather than some legislation is putting more red tape in the way. Kind of get that mindset of like, you're doing this for the greater good rather than for what's in it for you. And somewhere along the way, I think some of that has been lost. And I hope it comes back at some point in time. I think just finding people, and they don't even have to be older. They can be people of the same generation, but just finding people that will encourage you and mentor you and walk with you through things. That's been really beneficial for me.
Yeah, this is a tale, oh yeah, a tale of two hygienists. So there might be only one, bringing the best of dental knowledge, and we do it all with ease. We cover oral health and screening, and preventing gum disease. We're gonna do a lot of learning, and have a little bit of fun working at the dentist. A tale of two hygienists.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of A Tale of Two Hygienists, episode number 353. My name is Andrew Johnston, and thank you so much for making us a part of your day. Another great show, everyone. Today we have Alyssa Aberle on the show, and we talk about a couple of things that she's really passionate about. And like I mentioned on the intro last week, I pretty much used this episode of the podcast as a time to get to know her just a little bit better. I definitely already had a lot of respect for her, but after our brief chat, I respect her just that much more. And I think that you're going to as well. I know you're going to enjoy this. But we have some big news. And this big news happened last week. Many of you might have already seen this on social media. And for those of you that have reached out already, thank you so much. But for those that have not heard the news, I made the not so tough decision to sell the podcast company. So this Tale of Two Hygienists podcast is now sold. For you longtime listeners, you know that we have not just this show, but a whole team here at Tale of Two Hygienists who make this one. But you also know that we have several other shows that we contribute on or fully produce. And all of that is now going in the sale. And the question that I get asked a lot is why? Why did you sell the company? And so I will try and keep it somewhat to the point today. But maybe in a bonus episode or something, I'll elaborate just a little bit more. But the truth is, we had the podcast company up for sale for, I think, 1.5 years. So this wasn't new for us. It didn't feel like it was, a surprise or something that we didn't know was coming. We knew that we loved doing this and we were growing the show each year. But at that time, when we made that decision, 6 years had felt like a really long time of doing podcasting. And it was really hard. We weren't sure that we knew if we could bring new content, if we could bring new things that were exciting to an audience. And, we thought that maybe someone else could just, take this over and maybe do it bigger and better and all of that. So then this year happened with all of the changes that had surrounded it. And, I really felt more empowered to take over the show. And as we started putting more shows together, I felt really invigorated with the content. You all had some really great feedback for me this year, which I really, really appreciate. We shortened the episodes. We added new voices. We added them to, I think, the tip episodes and the fast facts both are some of the new ones. We brought in a bunch of new guests this year, which we've never had before. We brought in some newer topics, which I thought we'd pretty much tapped out of all the topics, but apparently there were still some more to be discussed. And I had a great fun time. And while it was really fun, I still always knew there's that lingering, we could still do this bigger and better. But in order to do that, I would have to hire even more people, more editors, maybe more salespeople, just maybe more hosts. There was just so many things that, we would have had to invest time and money and effort. And that was really hard when I was working a full-time job, traveling so much like I was. And so when Endeavor Business Media came along and I saw they already had all those pieces in place, it just made sense. It was a perfect partnership. I was able to meet and chat with some of the senior leaders at Endeavor. And when we were having our conversations, it wasn't really ever about like the money. It was about the quality. It was about the people. It felt different as we had conversations around acquisition. And you could tell that they really cared about their people that worked for them. And many of you already know Craig Dixon, who's in charge of the dental publishing group for Endeavor. And of course, many of you also know Jackie Sanders, who's the editor of RDH Mag. These are the types of people that I'm going to be working with. And of course, I want to do that. That makes a lot of sense. And so they were very kind and they offered to bring me on board. And of course, it made me laugh so much because yes, Brittany is also coming along. So many people of you asked, hey, congratulations, Andrew, but is Brittany also coming along? And I thought that was very sweet of all of you guys to be thinking about her. But yes, she is definitely coming along with us as well. Now that this deal has already closed and we're moving into the next phase of things, it has continued to be an absolute dream with how much they think about the people that are involved with the show. And there's just no downside that I can see before, no downside that I've seen afterwards. And so, of course I had to take that offer. So, okay. So that is what happened. The other question and the last question I'll answer right now is, so what's going to change with the show? And the answer to that is nothing for right now. Truthfully, I'll be pretty shocked if you could feel any sort of difference, for the shows coming up versus the shows that we've been doing in the past. But if and when things do change, because change is inevitable. I mean, even if I was to keep it, if I was to own it myself, I'd probably want to change some things here and there. If and when that does happen, I will absolutely always keep you in the loop as much as I can. I really just want to say thank you also to the listeners. Thank you for listening. Many of you for the first time, but many more of you for listening for years and years, sending in your support and your love on social media or email or whatever. I just can't say thank you enough. So really, truly from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for supporting us here to Tell Two Hygienists. And so with that, I hope you enjoy this episode getting to know Alyssa Aberle.
A tale of two hygienists.
Hey friends, quick pause in the show to remind you about the CE offered for several of our episodes. All you have to do is click into the show notes and follow the link to the CE Zoom website. Answer a few of those questions about the episode correctly and you'll be rewarded the appropriate amount of CEUs. This wouldn't be possible without a partnership with our friends at TempStars. TempStars is more than just a temp and a placement service. They are clinician-led and education-focused and strive to perfectly match individuals and dental offices. Learn more about tempstars.com or go back and listen to some of their tip episodes. They are absolutely worth the listen. And now, back to the show. What are you the most excited about?
That's a good question. I think the thing I get most excited about, if you ask somebody, what could you talk to somebody about without thinking, the easiest thing is probably silver diamine fluoride. But I also get really excited about legislation, but that's not so sexy for a lot of people. But
how can we make legislation sexy? Oh, we're already recording, by the way.
Great.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think it's hard for people because you hear politics and you want to run the other way, especially lately.
It can be very polarizing.
Totally.
Yeah.
But I think of it a little differently, like you're opening doors with legislation or removing barriers, because a lot of times that's what we're doing, especially with dental hygiene legislation. You're like, what's in the way right now of us doing what we could do, whether it's something we've been taught to do or something we're passionate about doing or something that's not being done for patient care. And it's getting all that red tape out of the way rather than some legislation is putting more red tape in the way.
For sure. So tell me more about like that process, because I've never had to, I've never been compelled to be a part of that legislative process. But I feel like, are you doing it on your own? Are you doing it with a group on behalf of somebody else? I mean, obviously on behalf of hygienists, but are there other groups that you're working with?
Most of the time, the legislation I've been involved in has been through the Dental Hygiene Association. So I'm really involved with my state association, and through that have gotten involved in some of the legislation happening. I've also been involved with a couple of other things that were not dental hygiene related through other nonprofit organizations that I am on the board for or work with that are healthcare related or healthcare adjacent, but not specifically dental hygiene. But a lot of the stuff I've done is through the Hygiene Association.
So let's walk through that process. Okay, so my assumption is there are regular meetings for the ADHA at the state level. You guys as a group decide, hey, these are the things that are important to us for our state, but also heads up, these are things that other people are introducing as bills or whatever that we want to make sure that we're talking about. And then what do you do with that? Like, what's the next step after that meeting?
Yeah, so most associations, including ADHA and the state constituents of ADHA, have policy that they vote on, and those policies are internal to your association, but they kind of guide you on what types of legislation or activities you're going to pursue. So we have a House of Delegates currently, and it's kind of like the business meeting of the year, and people can bring forward policies on various things. For instance, Susan Cotton's in our state, so she will bring forward something that relates to head and neck oral cancer screening, which that's something she's really passionate about. And we don't know what things to pursue if somebody doesn't bring it up because they're passionate about it. So somebody brings forward some proposed policy, and then the House of Delegates, which is the representation of our members, votes on, yes, we agree that this should be one of our priorities, or maybe not,
Maybe
or
next year.
maybe it needs some work before we decide
Sure.
that's the direction we want to take it. And then, like you said, sometimes it's something we've seen either at the national level of ADHA or in some other organization that we know is going to come down the pipeline. So we need to make some policy, some stance on it, so that if and when legislation happens, we have a stance on it. Because sometimes something comes up and we haven't made a policy on it. Well, we can't really speak on behalf of however many members, because I don't know what everybody thinks on this, and I'm not going to call them all and ask them what they think on it. So, yeah, so you vote on your policies, and then you have these policies. Some of the policies we have been around for 40 years. Some of them are newer. And then as things change or as things come up, you kind of know which direction to take it with legislation based on those policies. For instance, in Colorado this year, unexpectedly and not pushed by the Dental Hygiene Association, an outside health-related organization brought forth dental therapy. And so that was kind of unexpected, and it wasn't us as the Hygiene Association that was formulating it originally. But we had a policy on dental therapy because of stuff that had been happening nationally. So we had come up with some pretty basic policies, like we supported CODA accredited dental therapy programs. We supported dental therapy at, a certain education level. And so when this legislation started happening, we couldn't go ask everybody what they felt, but we had these policies that we kind of felt could take us in a certain direction. So as we're going through the legislative process, we knew this is a priority because this is what our policy says. We're not going to settle for anything that's not CODA accredited or whatever. So that's kind of how you take it. But then there's a lot of nuance in that too. There's a lot that can go one way or the other that doesn't fall into it. So
but how does that, I don't want to say how does it make you guys feel, but it's like, if they didn't reach out to partner with you at the very beginning, does that sometimes not put a strain on the relationship that you have with the ADA? Right? Because I hate to talk about turf wars, but.
So our state's weird too, because our state hygiene association actually has a really good relationship with the state dental association, unlike every other state, I feel.
Exactly.
And so they weren't the ones that brought it forward either. And so we were kind of on the same field of like, okay, we're both going to be involved in this because we both have interest in this and have a stake in this conversation. But we're both kind of coming from a more neutral place. It wasn't us versus them because neither of us was the initiator and neither of us was, trying to fight the other one. We were more okay, we're all going to get at the same table because we all have interest in how this turns out and what it's going to look like down the road. So it can definitely cause some strains, especially when things come out of the blue and nobody's expecting it. But luckily, the level of communication we've established over the last, I would say, at least decade, if not longer, with the Dental Association is that when things come up, we're able to just pick up a phone and talk to each other about it and see how each other feel rather than it being so contentious. But
I feel like that's a whole nother podcast about
that's
hey,
a whole separate
let's talk
conversation.
about having that communication.
Yeah, I could talk to you about how to actually partner together for a while. So.
Gosh, that would be good. So what part of the legislative process is the most appealing to you, though? Is it the formulation of like the ideas before it, or is it like actually advocating and getting out there?
I think it's like seeing that it's actually going to change something. Like you can talk about changing stuff all day, but it's that these are actually changes that are going to affect people for a long time. And coming into dental hygiene school in Colorado and having faculty members who were some of the people who got independent practice passed as legislation. We were one of the first states, if not the first state, to have local anesthesia. Maybe us in Washington. There's some debate there. But these people have been very progressive for a long time. And so you kind of come in and are like, we wouldn't be doing what we're doing today in Colorado without this legislative stuff.
Yeah.
You could talk about wanting to do it all day, but they actually went and did it. And so knowing that the things that you're doing legislatively now are going to be that for the dental profession 10, 20, 30 years down the road is
it's amazing
pretty
that you
neat.
think about that in the moment, because I feel like we're so much like instantaneous thinkers that we don't look back to our predecessors, the people that really built, the model of what we're trying to, man.
It's interesting because working for our Colorado Dental Hygienists Association, I get calls all the time from people in other states saying, all right, we really want to get independent practice in my state. How do we do it? And they want this like flow chart. And honestly, I wasn't alive when it happened in Colorado, so I've heard the story told a lot of times, but I wasn't there, and the world and the environment and the industry is so much different than it was in the 70s when Colorado was working on that legislation, that it's not something that's like a copy and paste. Every state's going to be different, but it's kind of hard not to acknowledge that legacy and that work that's been done before when that's how we practice today. So,
well, I mean, you mentioned already, like Washington and Colorado are both pretty progressive states with dental hygiene. And, even, I think the people that were working on it in the 70s and 80s for, different advocacy or whatever, but then to see that Colorado continued on a path of, mutual respect and, working together, collaboration. And then you look at Washington, it's like, oh, you guys were so progressive. Like, why are we're almost working backwards now?
Yeah,
like,
where
what
did we
is happening?
turn? Yeah.
Oh my gosh, it's
and that was a big thing for us with dental therapy was we were using, or the organization that brought forth dental therapy was using somewhat of a template that had been used in other states, which is fine because why reinvent the wheel if somebody else has already kind of worked through the process? But some of the stuff that was in the original draft of the bill was actually going to move us backwards. So if a hygienist went back to be a dental therapist, the things under their hygiene scope were actually going to be under a more restricted level of supervision than it currently is, because if we were using something from another state. And so you're like, yes, I guess that makes sense in that state, but let's not move backwards for sure. So one of the big things that we had to go through in the drafting process was, all right, let's make sure at least the hygiene portion of it stays untouched. So we can talk about all these other restorative and surgical things and what that looks like and what that calibration looks like with the supervising dentist. But let's not change the fact that hygienists have been able to do hygiene unsupervised for 50 years.
Yeah.
Let's not further restrict that because it's obviously been working for 50 years.
When people call you up and they ask you like, hey, we want to do, I don't know, do people really want to own their own practice, or they just want to have be able to practice unsupervised?
Both.
Or general supervision, I guess.
Both. So what I always talk to dentists about, too, even dentists from other states, because sometimes they'll call me because something's happening in their state.
Mm-hmm.
I always say unsupervised or independent practice, whatever you want to call it, is not just about hygienists opening their own practice. There are some hygienists who want to do that and that they have a passion for it and they have a business model and they've figured out how to do that. There's a lot of hygienists who like working with a dentist. They feel like that partnership and that collaboration is necessary for themselves, for their patients.
So sorry about whoever's moving
there's a table being moved.
Yeah, over there.
But yeah, I think sometimes it's just like, no, I like working in a dental practice or I like working with a dentist. I just want that flexibility for us to figure out what that looks like. I want the flexibility to see patients when they're not there. I want the flexibility to do exams and then kind of do somewhat of a teledentistry exam because they're gone and they can review stuff at a later date. Or I want the flexibility to go to a community setting or a nursing home or a homebound patient that's a patient of our practice but can't come in for whatever reason, and see them in a different setting with a different model that we've set up. So I think it just opens the opportunity for you to think outside the box and get away from what's always been done and be like, how else could we set this up? Can teledentistry be an option? Not so much dentist to patient. You can't do a filling over the phone.
Right.
But maybe provider to provider to teledentistry where a hygienist is still working for that practice, but they're just in a different setting and there's that communication virtually. So it's not just about hygienists not wanting to work with dentists, because a lot of the hygienists who own their own practices still have some form of relationship, whether it's referral or something with a dentist. But it's about opening your ability to think outside the box and create a new model and figure out a new way to do things, because the world's evolving, technology's evolving, so let's utilize that.
Something interesting, I've admired your Facebook work, I guess. Like because I'm actually in your guys' Colorado, like
a
Facebook
lot of
group.
people
I'm not really sure why, but anyways, and I've really respected your opinion on a lot of things. I've really appreciated you. Admittedly, though, you did say that you're a little bit younger than maybe a lot of people are doing policy change. A lot of people are doing that. How has your path of like personal development and all of like, where does that all stem from, and where did you get started? Because it's pretty incredible hearing you speak. Like, you speak like an expert on lots of things.
It was funny. Somebody asked me yesterday when I started speaking, and I would say I started speaking in middle school. I gave my 8th grade graduation speech and led a Veterans Day assembly in middle school. So I don't know when I started speaking. I just have a lot to say and probably have since I was little. So I just talk a lot. As far as like advocacy and like wanting to create change, I think that started early too. I was in student council in middle school and high school. Went to a national student council conference in high school, which is a great
brag right there.
Next level nerdiness.
Yeah.
I volunteered with an organization when I was in high school that was trying to get newly 18-year-olds that were in high school to register to vote. So it was really it was a nonpartisan organization, but it was like, hey, you can vote. And it was an election year. I graduated during an election year. So it was like, you can vote, and this is like something you can be a part of. So I guess I don't know when it started, but I just always was drawn to that type of stuff.
But you kept doing it. So
I kept doing it, yeah.
You went, so graduated high school, you prereqs then hygiene school right away?
I went to a small private school for 2 years, and then in Oklahoma, and then transferred to Colorado for hygiene school. So,
and how was that hygiene school experience, do you think, in Colorado compared to maybe other states that you've heard about?
I went to University of Colorado, which I was the last graduating class from there. They ended up closing our program, which was hard. Yeah. So I was really grateful that I got in when I did. And admittedly, when I decided to go there, I didn't know as much about Colorado and dental hygiene as I do now.
Sure.
I think I just ended up falling into the right place at the right time. But
case, yeah.
A lot of our faculty are we're very involved in the dental hygiene community. So one of our faculty members who's still a mentor of mine was Deb Mentorship. She's a past president of ADHA.
Shout out to Deb. I love her.
She's the best. I always tell her if I can download everything in her brain, I would be like superwoman because she knows everything. Yep. So, and she's been super involved in the legislative process in Colorado for years. She was one of the first hygienists to open her own practice. So she is so involved in that world. I think, again, being in the right place at the right time, her and I maybe randomly, maybe not, got partnered together. She was my mentor in hygiene school through our local association and have stayed friends forever.
Nice that you guys do that. We never had that opportunity.
They don't do it anymore, but they did it when I was a student. Wow. So, yeah, it was really nice because the hard part now is just honestly, it's finding mentors. Like the students are always receptive to it, but it's finding practicing hygienists who want to take their time and mentor.
What do you think happened? Why do you think that's a change?
I don't know.
Speculation, I know. It's really hard to know.
I've tried to analyze this for a while. I think part of it is people feel they feel like they're more busy. Now maybe it's technology. Maybe it's just that we're all doing 18 jobs instead of one job. But I think previous generations, I'm an older millennial, but I feel like previous generations had this sense of giving back and like duty to your profession, and like it was part of being part of a bigger thing than yourself. Was that
ingrained in school, or was that afterwards?
I think it was a generational thing, but I think there also probably was some of it in school, especially with women joining the workforce and especially joining like licensed professions. I feel like there was this is an honor to be part of something like this, and you give back to your association, or you're part of your church community, or you're part of, military families kind of get that mindset of like you're doing this for the greater good rather than for what's in it for you. And somewhere along the way, I think some of that has been lost, and I hope it comes back at some point in time, but
it's cyclical. I think, I think that, I don't know. I think generational things, we kind of go really far to the other end, and then it comes back when we don't want that anymore. It goes back to the other end, like a pendulum swinging, right? So I have more questions about your drive and your professional and personal development, because you didn't just stop at, okay, I'm going to be a hygienist. Like you kept like diving deeper into like the next step, the next step, the next step. Do you have any clue where that comes from? Not a clue.
No, not really.
Are you seeking them out, or they continually like just happen to be like falling into place, which happens a lot?
Both. I think I'm the type of person that doesn't, like, I never feel like I'm at the end. I always feel like there's something else I could do. When I had my oldest child, my husband and I had a conversation about whether or not I wanted to be a stay-at-home mom. And he looks at me and goes, honestly, I think if you were a stay-at-home mom, you'd end up volunteering for about 25 organizations, and you'd still work full-time just for free. And I was like, that's probably true. So I don't know. I think that's something, I don't know if you're born with it. It's the nurture versus nature conversation. But I feel like I've always been like, all right, what's next? How else can I do something? How else can I get involved? Also, maybe I have a hard time saying no.
That's probably true, too.
So that, too.
What is the next step?
I don't really know. I'm in the process of, trying to rebalance some things. I actually just resigned from my current clinical position, but looking at what I've been doing and the things I love about each of the things I do and how I can take the parts I love and keep doing them. I'm going to stay involved in the Hygiene Association. I know we have some probably big legislative things coming up, especially after this year with dental therapy, and I will stay working in community health. I specifically love mobile dentistry and being where people are rather than waiting for them to come to you, because a lot of patients can't, and being able to serve them where they are and regardless of any barriers that they might have, trying to provide that care. So that's something I'm really passionate about. And
sorry to cut you off, but like, what is your experience with mobile dentistry? You and I, like, while I know who you are, like, I don't really know who you are.
Yeah.
So it's kind of more of like, hey, tell me about you kind of a thing.
So I've done quite a few mission trips. I have been to Honduras 5 times, been to Mexico a couple times, and that was mostly before hygiene school and kind of started my passion for healthcare and access to care. And then when I graduated hygiene school, I kind of knew I wanted to stay in that community health mindset. So I've worked for community health organizations since I graduated, worked for 2 federally qualified health centers and a nonprofit that serves children. And I currently run a school-based sealant program that I've run for 8 years.
Awesome.
So
That's so good.
Yeah, so I really found that passion for just going to where patients are and trying to help them get around the barriers that are in their way.
You were saying earlier that SDF is one of your passions. How have you been able to like implement that into all of the things that you're doing?
Yeah, so it kind of did pull into all the aspects of the things I do. So the first time I heard about SDF was at an ADHA conference in, I want to say 2016. And went back and was super excited. And I was like, we're going to get this in our clinic. This is going to be amazing. And there was a pilot project happening in Colorado for hygienists doing interim therapeutic restorations. And one of the hygienists who was part of that pilot project had asked about SDF because it wasn't really, a lot of states went through this where it wasn't really said in their Practice Act yes or no because it was new. Well, Colorado, unlike Colorado, the legal counsel for the dental board decided that it caused irremediable alteration of tooth structure and therefore was not in the hygiene scope of practice.
And what would have done that? The stain, I guess?
I guess. So like most states said, okay, it's a fluoride. So if you can use fluoride, you can use it. Colorado took a different stance, which I said, well, hopefully even fluoride causes irremediable alteration of the tooth structure. Hopefully it's changing. Otherwise, then why are we using it? So it was kind of a strange process, but we ended up actually having to go through legislation to add it to the hygiene scope of practice. So I was pretty involved in that process because I was really passionate about the silver diamine fluoride and getting it to where we could use it. And then was also part of the Hygiene Association trying to go through that legislative process. So that happened in 2018. And then through that legislative process, part of the requirement was that hygienists had to take a 1-hour course on silver diamine fluoride in order to use it. So I talked to Dr. Jeremy Horst and said, okay, what would you put in a 1-hour course? He says, I would tell them to read the pamphlet on how to use it. It's like you dry a tooth, you paint it on. It's really not that complicated. But this was how it was. And so it had to be a live course. It had to be at least an hour, and it had to include like X, Y, and Z. So there weren't a lot of live courses on it, at least not frequently enough to get everybody trained on it. So I started teaching a course on it. So from like 2018 till now, I've done a SDF webinar about once a month so that hygienists in Colorado could learn how to use it and get that box checked for them to get to use it in practice. And then working in community health, once we were able to use it, I was able to get our dentists informed about what it was because a lot of them hadn't heard of it yet. And I would say our pediatric dentists where I work use it quite a bit. Our general dentists are catching up. At first it was, oh, it's great for kids, but they didn't see the applications for adults. But they're getting more on board with it. The school-based program that I run has been a challenge because putting SDF on at school and a kid going home now with a black tooth is a little strange. So the consent process, especially working for a community health center, gets a little crazy. But so I kind of got to follow that one through all the phases of it.
That is incredible. I'm really impressed that, I don't know, I think the open-mindedness of so many people that are kind of along your path of saying, okay, yes, let's figure this out. Yes, let's figure this out. Okay, yes, we're going to have to, no, we can't do it in the state, but let's write legislation to get this. Like, there's been so many opportunity that people have said yes. I don't feel like that's a normal pathway.
I might be persistent.
I was going to say, are you a little bit like,
I'm like,
picking
this,
at that
this is
scale
what we're going to do.
Okay.
Probably a little bit, but
You don't come off, especially right now on this podcast, you do not come off that way.
I've definitely, I think, toned it down a little bit over the years. And
Really?
I don't know if that's age or motherhood or what, but I was definitely the kid growing up that was bossy. And now people who meet me are like, I don't really feel like I see that from you. But definitely had that as a kid. Good leadership skills, though, right? That's really what that translates into.
So. I want to ask you about some of the key lessons that you've learned kind of along your journey as a hygienist. And I don't have any specific realm of where I want you to like speak on it, but like some of the most impactful things that you've learned.
So I just wrote an article of the 5 things I wish I learned in hygiene school, and I feel like I've been thinking about this a lot. I think the biggest thing when I look at all the things that I've done and enjoyed doing, like you said, a lot of them are kind of the people I've known and the opportunities that I've been able to kind of open doors into. And I think a lot of that comes from mentorship. And I think especially younger generations, you don't always recognize that there's a lot that you could learn from somebody that's older and more experienced. But for me, it's been the opposite. I feel like like I said, Deb, like, can I download all the things that are in your head? Because I feel like she has so many experiences in the dental community and outside that I could learn from. And so I think just finding people, and they don't even have to be older. They can be people of the same generation, but just finding people that'll encourage you and mentor you and like walk with you through things, that's been really beneficial for me. I would say too, just finding the things that you're passionate about. So one of the things, like I said, I have a hard time saying no sometimes, but I've learned that's actually really valuable because there's a lot of things I could kind of go down that path, and that's just not where my passion is. Like somebody out there is really passionate about lasers. My friend Joy in Colorado.
Yeah,
that's not mine. Like I'm not passionate about that, but I love that she is, and I love that that's her thing, and I want to encourage her in that, but that's not my thing. So if I said yes to everything, I would never find the thing that I actually really love to do. So sometimes you feel bad for saying no to something, or an opportunity comes up that sounds really neat, but if that's not where you're really going to find your passion, and that's not the thing that's going to keep you going, it's okay to say no sometimes.
Right, yeah.
Especially I think when people are newer in their career or at a kind of crossroads in their career and they're looking for a new opportunity, you feel like everything that comes at you, you should say yes to it because it could be the next best thing for you. But it could also not be, especially if that's not where your passion is. So like being selective with your yes.
It's so hard though because you just don't know.
You don't
know what you don't know, right? That's what the saying is. It's like, I think people looked at me like early on and they're like, man, that guy's flighty. He's just kind of doing every little tiny thing. I'm like, yeah, I'm just trying to figure out what I like though. Like I don't know how to ask a question if I've never been exposed to it. And so let me just try a little bit and see if I like it. And
I think that there's a difference too. There's like trying a little bit of everything or getting involved and seeing where you fit versus like trying to be everything to everyone. That's different too. So I was just at RDH Evolution and I am with Stephanie Botts, and she's like the ergonomics like guru, and that's like her thing, and that's like she's very focused on that. And sometimes I'm like, man, I wish I had like a thing, like one thing that it was, Andrew's going to talk to me. I know I'm going to talk about this one thing because that's what I love. But then I'm like, but that's not me. I like having these different things that I do. And I think it keeps me like moving because I think I would be kind of bored if I was in one thing, just knowing my own personality. So I think it's good for me to take, like I said earlier, the things I love about these various things and pursue them instead of just jumping all in on one thing. But it's different for everybody.
Did you get your bachelor's when you graduated?
I did.
From the university? Did you end up going to do more education after that or no?
Yeah, I have an MBA.
Makes a lot more sense now. Okay.
I
should
was
have asked that earlier.
I was talking earlier about you're sitting in a class for an MBA and you get a new professor for that course, and they're going around and they want to know people's backgrounds and where they come from. It's like finance, marketing, finance, dental hygiene. Where did you come from?
This is the wrong classroom.
Right. Are you in the right room? And then likewise, when I was in hygiene school, we had a speaker come in and we did the DISC personality test, and everybody in the class was S or I, and I was DC. And the speaker looked at me and said, "Are you in the right room?" So I guess I'm never in the right room, or maybe I'm always in the right room.
Maybe you're always in the right room, breaking the
but
trends.
Yes.
Yeah, I love it. I've really enjoyed getting to know you over this podcast.
Thanks.
I know it's been a different kind of a different feel, I think, but like you said, like I had so many 5 little bullet points of things I want to talk to you about that I know that you're involved in. We didn't even get into infection control. We didn't dive deeper into ADHA. We didn't dive deeper into a lot of these things. So hopefully we'll come back and we'll talk again.
Sure.
But
I'd love that.
Any last thoughts or messages for students or new grads?
I think, like I said, find somebody that can be a mentor, find people that'll be your encouragers. Yeah, just use the people around, not use them, but bounce off of the people around you and build each other up, because it can be hard, especially a lot of hygienists practice clinically. They're the only hygienist in the practice, or there's only 2 of them, but they work opposite days, and it can feel really lonely and isolated. So, like, build that community around you.
It's been great. Thanks, Alyssa.
Thanks.
Yeah, this is a tale, oh yeah, a tale of 2 hygienists. So there might be only one, bringing the best of dental knowledge, and we do it all with ease. We cover oral health and screening, and preventing gum disease. We're gonna do a lot of learning, and have a little bit of fun working at the dentist. A tale of 2 hygienists.